Chapter 1.
The taste of copper flooded my mouth as consciousness dragged me back from the void, each breath feeling like shattered glass scraping against my lungs. Rain hammered down on the cracked asphalt around me, mixing my blood with oil stains and street debris, creating a crimson river that disappeared into the storm drains like my life was slipping away with it. I tried to move, God, I tried, but my left leg bent at an angle that made my stomach lurch. The headlights that had slammed into me were long gone, leaving nothing but the echo of squealing tires and the metallic crunch that would haunt whatever time I had left. My phone lay 3 feet away, its screen spider-webbed and dark, as useless as I was. The storm above matched the chaos inside my chest. Thunder rolled across the sky like an angry god, and lightning split the darkness in jagged wounds that reminded me too much of the pain tearing through my ribs. Each flash illuminated the empty road stretching in both directions. No cars, no help, just me and the realization that I was going to die alone on some forgotten stretch of highway.
But something was wrong.
Something beyond the obvious wrongness of my broken body and the growing pool of blood beneath me. There was a heat building in my chest. Different from the fire of pain, it pulsed with each labored heartbeat, spreading outward like molten gold through my veins. I'd felt it before, always when I was afraid, always when I was desperate, but never this strong, never this alive. The rain began to steam where it hit my skin. No, I whispered through chattering teeth, the weather from cold or terror, I couldn't tell. Not now, please, not now. Because the last time this heat had taken over, I'd burned down half my apartment building. The time before that, I'd nearly killed my college roommate when she tried to wake me from a nightmare. That's why I lived alone now, why I worked night shifts at the diner, why I avoided crowds and kept my distance from everyone who tried to get close. The heat was getting stronger.
I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push it down the way I'd learned to do, but my control was slipping along with my consciousness. Whatever lived inside me, this thing I couldn't name, couldn't understand, it was trying to save me, and saving me meant setting the world on fire.
The first spark jumped from my fingertips, hissing as it met the rain. Someone help me, I sobbed, but the wind swallowed my words. Who was I kidding? Even if someone found me, what then? Call an ambulance. Load me into a metal box while this inferno built inside my chest. I'd cook everyone alive before we made it to the hospital. Another spark, then another. The asphalt beneath my palm began to crack and bubble. But so when I heard it, the sound of paws hitting wet pavement, moving fast. Too fast. Whatever was coming toward me wasn't human. And right now, with my body broken and my control shattered, I wasn't entirely human either. Through the sheets of rain, I saw eyes reflecting the lightning. Golden. Wild. Predatory. A wolf. But not just any wolf. This creature was massive, easily twice the size of any natural wolf I'd ever seen in nature documentaries. Its fur was so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it, and when it moved, there was an intelligence in its gait that made my skin crawl with recognition. It wasn't just watching me, it knew me. The wolf circled closer, those golden eyes never leaving my face, and I felt something inside my chest respond to its presence. The heat that had been building toward explosion suddenly shifted, like two magnets finding their pull, like a lock recognizing its key. Stay back. I managed to croak, though we both knew I was in no position to make threats. Blood loss was making my vision blur, and the supernatural fire in my veins was the only thing keeping me conscious. I can't control it. I'll hurt you. The wolf stopped maybe 10 feet away, tilting its massive head as if it understood every word. Then it did something that made my heart stutter. It sat back on its haunches and simply waited. Lightning cracked overhead again, and in that split second of illumination, I could have sworn I saw something impossible in those golden eyes. Not just intelligence, but recognition. Like it had been searching for me. Like it had found exactly what it was looking for. The heat in my chest pulsed again, but this time it didn't feel dangerous. It felt answering, like a call being returned across an impossible distance. Rain continued to fall, but the drops were evaporating before they could reach my skin now. The asphalt beneath me glowed cherry red, and steam rose around us in ghostly spirals that the wind couldn't scatter. The wolf's eyes never wavered. And somewhere in the back of my failing mind, I realized that maybe dying alone wasn't my biggest problem anymore. Maybe my biggest problem was figuring out why this creature looked at me like it had been waiting its whole life for this moment. Like it knew exactly what I was. If you're feeling the pull of this story already, hit that subscribe button because this is just the beginning of a tale that will burn its way straight into your heart. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when our broken heroine discovers the truth about her mysterious savior. Chapter 2. The wolf moved with liquid grace through the steam and smoke rising from my overheated body, and I should have been terrified. Every rational part of my mind screamed that I was about to become prey, that this massive creature would finish what the car had started. Instead, I felt calm for the first time since the accident. Hell, for the first time in years, the fire burning through my veins felt controlled, not gone but contained. Like someone had turned down a gas flame from raging inferno to steady burn. The wolf stopped 3 feet away, close enough that I could see the intelligence burning in those impossible golden eyes, close enough to smell the wild forest scent that clung to its dark fur, rain beaded on its coat like scattered diamonds. But unlike me, the drops that touched its skin didn't turn to steam. "You're not afraid of me," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm. It wasn't a question. Somehow and possibly I could sense its emotions, the way you might sense someone standing behind you in the dark, and there was no fear there, only recognition, purpose. The wolf lowered its massive head until we were eye to eye, and when it spoke, not with words but with a voice that resonated directly inside my mind, my world tilted completely off its axis. "Hello, Ember." My breath caught. Nobody had called me by my real name in 3 years. Not since I'd fled my hometown after the fire, after the accusations, after my own parents had looked at me like I was something dangerous that needed to be contained. I'd been going by Emma ever since, working cash-only jobs, staying invisible. But this creature, this impossible, beautiful, terrifying creature, knew exactly who I was. "How do you—" I started to ask, but the words died as the wolf began to change. The transformation happened in heartbeats, but I saw every impossible second of it. Bones lengthened and reshaped, dark fur melted away to reveal olive-toned skin, and muscles reformed into a distinctly human silhouette. The golden eyes remained constant throughout, burning with the same ancient intelligence. When it was over, a man knelt in the rain where the wolf had been. And not just any man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made the air around him feel charged with electricity. Dark hair fell across his forehead in wet strands, and his face was all sharp angles and devastating beauty, the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers or in museums. But it was his eyes that held me captive. Those same impossible golden eyes that had watched me with such knowing intensity. He was completely naked, and he didn't seem to care. "My name's Kieran," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through my chest. "Kieran Blackthorn, and I've been looking for you for a very long time." I tried to sit up, gasped at the pain shooting through my ribs, and settled for glaring at him from my sprawled position on the superheated asphalt. I coughed, tasting blood. "That's really not the weird part of this situation." A smile ghosted across his lips, not humor, but something darker. Something that looked like relief mixed with regret. "No, I suppose it isn't." He stood in one fluid motion, seemingly unbothered by the storm or his nakedness, and began walking toward me. Each step was deliberate, predatory, and I felt that strange calm in my chest waver slightly, because now that he was human-shaped, I could see the scars. They covered his chest and arms in intricate patterns, not random wounds, but something that looked almost ritualistic, like brands. Don't, I warned, holding up one hand. Sparks jumped between my fingers and the rain hissed where it met my skin. I told you I can't control it. I'll hurt you. He stopped just outside the circle of superheated air surrounding my body, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made something deep inside my chest want to submit. No, you won't. You don't understand, I insisted, panic rising as the heat in my veins responded to his proximity. I've hurt people before. I've killed 3 people, he said quietly, cutting me off. A burglar who broke into your apartment when you were 19, your abusive ex-boyfriend when you were 21, and a man who tried to assault you in a parking garage 6 months ago. The world went silent except for the pounding of rain and my own thundering heartbeat. Even the thunder seemed to pause, waiting for my response. How could you possibly know that? I breathed. His golden eyes softened just slightly. Because I've been watching over you since the first one, making sure the authorities never connected the dots, making sure you stayed safe. The implications of that statement hit me like another car. You've been stalking me. Protecting you, he corrected. And there was steel in his voice now. Do you think it was a coincidence that you were never caught? That the security cameras always malfunctioned at just the right moments? That witnesses always seemed to develop convenient memory gaps? I stared at him, my mind reeling all those years of paranoia, of looking over my shoulder, of expecting police to show up at my door, and someone had been covering for me the entire time. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. He knelt again, just at the edge of where the air shimmered with heat around me, and his expression became almost tender. Because you're not a killer, Ember. You're not a monster. You're exactly what our kind has been waiting for. Our kind? Thunder rolled overhead, but it sounded different now. Less chaotic, more like a drumbeat, building towards something significant. You know what I am, he said simply. And deep down, underneath all that fear and self-hatred, you know what you are too. The heat in my chest pulsed, responding to something in his voice, and for just a moment, I felt it. The shape of something vast and powerful sleeping inside me, something with wings and claws and fire for blood, something that recognized the predator kneeling just beyond my reach. The dragon bloodline died out centuries ago, I whispered, voicing the impossible truth I'd never dared to speak aloud. His smile was sharp as a blade now, all teeth and promise. No, little dragon, it just went into hiding. Lightning split the sky above us, illuminating his face in stark relief, and I saw something there that made my broken heart stutter. Not just recognition or even desire, though both of those burned in those golden depths. I saw reverence, like he was looking at something sacred. The question as he continued, reaching out slowly until his fingertips almost touched the shimmering barrier of heat surrounding me. Are you ready to stop hiding? To be continued. Chapter 3. His words hung in the air between us like a challenge, and suddenly I was 16 again, standing in the charred remains of what used to be my childhood bedroom, watching my mother's face crumple with horror and disgust. Dragon bloodline. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. You make it sound so noble, so mythical. The heat radiating from my body flickered, responding to the bitter memories clawing their way up from the depths where I'd buried them. Kieran's golden eyes tracked every shift in the flames dancing across my skin, reading me like an open book. Tell me what happened, he said quietly, settling back on his heels, but never taking his gaze off mine. Tell me about the first time. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Only the jagged edge of old wounds that had never properly healed. Which first time? The first time I nearly burned down my high school. The first time my own father called me a freak, or the first time I realized that everyone I'd ever loved was terrified of me. Rain continued to fall around us, creating a curtain of privacy in the middle of nowhere. Steam rose from my overheated skin, but Kieran remained perfectly still at the edge of my dangerous proximity, as if he had all the time in the world to listen to me unravel. The beginning, he said simply, before you learn to be afraid of yourself. The memory hit me like a physical blow, dragging me back to a time when I still believed in fairy tales and happy endings, when I thought being different might actually be something special instead of something shameful. I was 7, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm. It was winter, and our heat had been shut off for 3 days. Mom was working double shifts at the factory. Dad was, well, Dad was drinking his problems away. As usual, my little brother Jake was so cold he couldn't stop shivering. I could still see it so clearly. Jake's blue lips, his tiny hands clenched into fists, the way his breath came out in puffs of white vapor even though we were inside, my baby brother looking at me with those trusting brown eyes, believing I could fix everything. I just wanted to warm him up, I continued, the heat in my chest pulsing with the emotion of the memory. I held his hands and wished so hard for him to be warm, and then you gave him fire, Kieran finished softly. I nodded, tears mixing with rain on my cheeks. Golden flames, like liquid sunlight. They came from my hands, my chest, everywhere. But they didn't burn him. They just surrounded him like a blanket. He laughed and called me his dragon sister. The smile that crossed my lips was bitter as winter wind. For about 10 minutes, I was a hero. Jake was warm, he was happy, and I thought I was magic. Real magic.
What changed?
Kieran asked, though I suspected he already knew.
Dad came home drunk and found us, I said, my voice hardening. Saw the flames dancing around Jake like little golden pets. Saw me glowing like a goddamn Christmas tree. And the look on his face.
I had to stop talking for a moment, the memory too raw even after all these years. My father's expression that night had been the first time I'd seen true fear directed at me, but it wouldn't be the last. He screamed. I whispered, called me a devil child, said I was going to burn the whole house down with all of us in it. Mom came running, and when she saw what I was doing, I shook my head. The fear in her eyes was worse than Dad's anger. Kieran's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting me purge the poison that had been festering inside me for years. They made me stop, I continued. Made me swear never to do it again, Jake cried, because he was cold again. But they said it was better than letting his freak sister turn him into charcoal. They sent me to my room, and I heard them whispering about doctors, about medications, about military schools that might be able to fix me. The flames dancing across my skin flared higher, responding to the old rage and hurt. So I learned to hide it, learned to swallow the fire, to pretend I was normal. It worked for a while, years actually. I almost convinced myself they were right, that I was just a disturbed kid with an overactive imagination. But it didn't stay hidden, Kieran observed. How could it? I asked, anger bleeding into my voice. You can't cage something like this forever. The fire wants to burn, wants to protect, wants to be free. And every time someone threatened me, every time I was scared or desperate or just pushed too far, I gestured at the superheated asphalt beneath me, at the way the rain turned to steam before it could touch my skin. It came roaring back with interest. I could see Jake's face in my mind, 23 years old now, married with a baby on the way. He'd sent me a wedding invitation 2 years ago, but I'd been too afraid to go. What if my nephew inherited whatever cursed blood ran through our veins? What if I lost control at the ceremony and hurt innocent people? What if Jake looked at me the same way our parents had that night when I was 7, with fear and disgust and the bone-deep certainty that I was something wrong? They were wrong about you, Kieran said quietly, and his voice carried a conviction that made something inside my chest twist, painfully.
Were they?
I challenged. Look around you. I'm literally melting the road. 3 people are dead because I couldn't control this thing inside me. I live alone, work alone, push away anyone who tries to get close because I know what I am. What are you? He asked. The question was so simple, so direct, but it cut straight to the heart of everything I'd been running from. A monster? I whispered. No. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet, absolute in its certainty. You're a dragon who's been told her whole life that fire is evil. You're a protector who's been convinced she's a destroyer.
I'm broken, I interrupted, my voice cracking.
Whatever noble bloodline you think I come from, whatever destiny you imagine I'm supposed to fulfill, you're looking at the wrong girl. I'm just someone who hurts people by existing.
Kieran leaned forward then, close enough that the heat radiating from my body should have been uncomfortable, and his golden eyes burned with an intensity that took my breath away.
Then why? He said softly. Does your fire recognize mine?
Before I could ask what he meant, warmth that wasn't mine began to bloom in the air around us. Not the wild, chaotic heat of my power, but something older, more controlled. His skin began to glow with a subtle golden light, and I realized that what I'd taken for scars on his chest and arms weren't scars at all. They were marks, ancient symbols that pulsed with their own internal fire. You're not the only one who's different, little dragon, he murmured. You're just the only one who's been made to feel ashamed of it.
And for the first time in my adult life, sitting broken and bleeding on a rain-soaked highway with a stranger who could transform into a wolf, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. Repeat. What secrets is the mysterious Kieran hiding? And can Ember finally learn to embrace the fire that's been burning inside her all along?
Chapter 4.
We need to get you somewhere safe, Kieran said, rising to his feet with that fluid grace that marked him as something other than human. Your injuries need tending, and there are things you need to see.
I wanted to argue, to insist that nowhere was safe when I was involved, but the blood loss was making my vision swim, and my protest died in my throat. When he stepped closer, crossing into the superheated air around my body, without flinching, I felt that strange calm settle over me again. This is going to hurt, he warned, sliding his arms beneath me with careful precision. He was right. The movement sent shock waves of agony through my broken leg and cracked ribs, but something else happened too. The moment his skin touched mine, the chaotic fire raging through my veins quieted. Not extinguished, but tamed, like two flames finding harmony instead of fighting for dominance.
How are you doing that? I gasped against his chest as he lifted me easily.
Later, he murmured, and began walking with me, cradled against him like I weighed nothing. First, we need to reach the sanctuary. The rain had slowed to a gentle mist, and as we left the road behind, entering what looked like untouched wilderness, I noticed something strange about our surroundings. The trees here were older than anything I'd ever seen, massive oaks and pines that towered into the darkness like ancient sentinels. Their branches formed a canopy so thick that barely any rain penetrated to the forest floor.
But more unsettling was the way they seemed to bend toward us as we passed, as if acknowledging Kieran's presence, or mine.
This place, I whispered, feeling something deep in my chest respond to the primordial energy radiating from the forest itself. The Whispering Grove, Kieran said softly, one of the few places left where the old magic still runs strong, where the barriers between worlds are thin enough for truth to bleed through. We walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, following paths that seemed to appear beneath Kieran's feet and disappear behind us. The deeper we went, the more I could feel something vast and ancient watching our approach, not hostile, but evaluating. Finally, we emerged into a circular clearing where the canopy opened to reveal the storm clouds rolling overhead, but it was what stood in the center of the clearing that stole my breath completely. A stone altar rose from the earth like it had grown there, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to writhe and dance in the dim light. The stone itself was unlike anything I'd ever seen, not gray or brown, but a deep, lustrous black shot through with veins of gold that pulsed with their own inner light.
Dragonstone.
I knew what it was without understanding how I knew, the same way I'd always known that fire lived in my blood. The altar called to something primal inside me, something that had been sleeping for far too long.
Kieran, I breathed, what is this place?
And set me down gently at the base of the altar, supporting me so I could lean back against the warm stone.
The moment my spine touched the carved surface, the golden veins flared brighter, and I felt a jolt of recognition that made my heart race.
This is where it began, he said, settling beside me with his back against the altar as well. 3,000 years ago, when the first dragons walked among humans as protectors instead of myths, the stone was warm against my back, and I could swear I felt a pulse running through it, slow and steady like a massive heartbeat. Dragons weren't real 3,000 years ago. Kirian's laugh was soft but held an edge of sadness. Dragons were the first real thing. Little one? Before humans learned to fear magic, before they decided that power was something to be conquered instead of revered, dragons were the guardians of the sacred fires, the keepers of balance between worlds. As he spoke, the symbols carved into the altar began to glow more brightly, and I could make out shapes that looked almost familiar. A woman with flames dancing around her outstretched hands. A great dragon coiled around a tree that might have been the world tree from Norse mythology. Warriors with fire in their eyes standing against creatures of shadow and ice.
What happened to them? I asked.
Though part of me already knew the answer would break my heart. What happens to all magical things when humans grow afraid? He said quietly. They were hunted, slaughtered, driven into hiding, so deep that eventually even they forgot what they truly were.
The stone pulsed again, and suddenly I was seeing things that couldn't be real. Visions flickering across the surface of the altar like ghostly movies. A great city of crystal and flame, dragons soaring through skies, painted with aurora, humans and dragons working together to heal wounds in the very fabric of reality.
The last known dragon died over 1,000 years ago, Kieran continued. But his voice seemed to be coming from very far away now. Or so we thought, until reports started filtering in from around the world. Unexplained fires that didn't burn, children born with golden eyes in temperatures that ran impossibly high. Women who could call flame to their hands when threatened.
The visions were coming faster now, overwhelming my senses. I saw a woman who looked like me standing at this very altar, her hands pressed to the stone as golden fire erupted from the earth around her. I saw armies of shadow creatures retreating before walls of dragon flame. I saw
The Emberborn, I whispered, the words fallen from my lips without conscious thought.
Kira went very still beside me. What did you say?
The Emberborn, I repeated, and now I could see it clearly in the stone's memory. She who carries the first fire, the one who will wake the sleeping flames and call the dragons home. The symbols on the altar were blazing now, so bright I should have been blinded, but instead of hurting my eyes, the light seemed to sink into my skin, warming me from the inside out, and in that warmth, I felt something vast and ancient stirring to life.
The prophecy, Kieran breathed, and there was something like awe in his voice. You're remembering the prophecy? I turned to look at him, and in his golden eyes, I saw the same recognition I felt burning in my own chest. You knew when you found me on that road. You already knew what I was. I hoped, he admitted. The signs were all there. The way fire bends to your will, the way you instinctively use it to protect instead of destroy, the fact that you've survived this long despite having no training. But this, he gestured at the blazing altar, at the way the very air around us seemed to shimmer with awakened power. This confirms it.
Confirms what? I asked. Though I was afraid I already knew. He reached out and took my hand, and where our skin touched, golden flames danced without burning either of us.
That you're the one we've been waiting for, he said softly. The last daughter of the dragon bloodline. The one prophesied to restore the balance between worlds. Thunder rolled overhead, but it sounded different now. Not chaotic and threatening, but rhythmic. Like a great drum calling warriors to battle.
Kirian? I whispered, fear and wonder warring in my chest. What exactly am I supposed to restore balance between?
His expression grew grim, and in the distance I could swear I heard something howling that didn't sound like any earthly wolf. Light and shadow, he said quietly. Life and death. The world you know. He paused, his grip on my hand tightening, and the realm of nightmares that's been trying to break through for the last 1,000 years. The altar pulsed one final time, and in that pulse, I felt the weight of destiny settling around my shoulders like a cloak made of starfire. Whether I wanted it or not, I was no longer just Amber the waitress, Amber the runaway, Amber the girl who'd spent her whole life hiding from her own power.
I was something far more dangerous. I was hope. The ancient prophecy has awakened. But with destiny comes danger. What dark forces have been waiting for the Emberborn to reveal herself?
Someone out there scrolling right now, feeling broken and dangerous just like Ember did. They need this story, but they'll never find it if you don't hit that like button. Don't let them stay lost. Like and subscribe. Be the reason someone discovers they're not a monster, just powerful.
Chapter 5. The howling came closer, and it brought friends.
I felt them before I saw them, a wrongness creeping through the sacred grove like oil spreading through clear water. The ancient trees that had bent toward us in reverence now shuddered and drew back, their leaves rustling with what sounded disturbingly like whispers.
Kieran,
I said, my voice tight with a fear I didn't fully understand. What is that?
He was already moving, rising to his feet with predatory grace, every line of his body radiating dangerous tension. Shadow touched, he growled, and the sound was more wolf than human. They found us.
The golden light from the altar flickered like a candle in wind, and I realized with growing horror that the darkness creeping toward us wasn't natural. It moved with purpose, reaching out with tendrils that seemed to swallow light itself.
found us how? I demanded, struggling to stand despite my injuries. This place is supposed to be protected.
It is, Kieran said grimly, which means they didn't track us here. His golden eyes met mine and I saw the terrible understanding dawning in them. They were already waiting.
The temperature around us began to drop with unnatural speed, and my breath came out in visible puffs, despite the warmth still radiating from the altar. Frost began forming on the ancient symbols carved into the stone, trying to smother the golden glow that had welcomed my awakening.
Someone told them, I whispered, the betrayal hitting me like a physical blow. Someone knew we would come here.
The howling erupted from 3 different directions at once, and shapes began materializing from the unnatural darkness. Not quite wolves, not quite human, but something caught horribly in between. Their eyes glowed with sickly yellow light, and where their feet touched the sacred ground, the grass withered and died.
The council.
Kieran spat, his hands beginning to glow with the same golden fire I'd seen on his markings. They were supposed to protect you, not...
He never finished the sentence. The largest of the shadow creatures launched itself from the treadline with impossible speed, claws extended toward my throat.
I acted on pure instinct. Fire exploded from my hands in a torrent of golden flame that lit up the entire clearing, turning night into blazing day. The creature struck my flames and shrieked, a sound like metal tearing before dissolving into wisps of oily smoke.
But there were more. So many more.
Ember! Kieran shouted over the chaos as the clearing erupted into battle. The altar? Stay close to the altar.
I pressed my back against the dragonstone, feeling its ancient power pulse against my spine as more shadow creatures poured from the darkness between the trees. Kieran had shifted partially, his human form taking on distinctly lupine characteristics, extended claws, elongated canines, eyes that burned like molten gold. He moved through the attacking creatures like death incarnate, but for every one he destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place.
There are too many, I gasped, sending another wave of dragon fire toward a cluster of the things trying to flank us. Where are they all coming from?
The void, Kieran snarled, his voice distorted by his partial transformation. The realm of nightmares. Someone has opened a rift. A rift? The word sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the unnatural cold spreading through the grove. I remembered the visions from the altar, the ancient memories of dragons standing against creatures of shadow and ice. This was what they had fought. This was what had required the ultimate sacrifice of an entire species.
And now it was back. A new voice cut through the battle, human, refined, dripping with full sympathy. Stand down, Kieran. You know this is how it has to be.
3 figures emerged from the tree line, and unlike the shadow creatures, these were definitely human. They wore long coats that billowed in the supernatural wind, and each carried a staff topped with a crystal that pulsed with sickly light. The woman who had spoken was tall and elegant, with silver hair and eyes like chips of winter sky. Counselor Thorn, Kieran growled, placing himself more firmly between them and me. I should have known you'd betray your own oaths.
The woman.
Thorn smiled with the kind of cold beauty that belonged on marble statues. Betray? I prefer to think of it as preventing catastrophe. You know as well as I do what happens when dragons awaken.
Enlighten me, I said, finding my voice despite the terror crawling up my throat. The altar thrummed against my back, and I could feel its ancient power responding to my emotional state. The golden veins in the stone were blazing brighter, casting dancing shadows on the faces of our enemies.
War? Thorn said simply.
Destruction, the end of the careful balance we've maintained for 1,000 years. She gestured at the shadow creatures still circling us like hungry sharks. These things exist because that balance was broken once before, because your ancestors thought they could play God with forces beyond their understanding. You're lying, I said, but doubt was creeping in. The visions I'd seen in the altar had been beautiful, but they'd also shown battles, showed dragons fighting desperately against an enemy that seemed endless.
Am I? Thorn asked. Then tell me, child, in all your years of protecting yourself for that fire, how many innocents died in the crossfire? How much destruction followed in your wake? The apartment building. My college roommate's burns. The parking garage filled with screaming people fleeing from flames they couldn't understand. That's different. I protested, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. I was untrained. I didn't know how to control it. And what makes you think you can control it now?
One of the other counselors asked. He was younger than Thorn, with dark hair and cruel reins. What makes you think awakening your full power won't turn you into exactly the monster your parents always feared you were?
The words hit their target with surgical precision. Every insecurity I'd ever harbored, every moment of self-doubt, every night I'd lain awake wondering if the world would be safer without me. All of it came rushing back in a tide of shame and fear.
The fire in my veins flickered.
Don't listen to them, Kieran said urgently, his eyes never leaving the counselors even as he spoke to me. They're using your own doubts against you. That's what they do. They break spirits before they break bodies.
The wolf is right about one thing, Thorn said conversationally. We are very good at what we do. The question is, child, what are you going to choose? Will you come with us quietly and let us help you suppress this curse before it destroys everything you touch? Or will you force us to take more permanent measures? The shadow creatures pressed closer, their yellow eyes fixed hungrily on my face. Behind them, more figures were emerging from the darkness. Humans in the same billowing coats, each carrying weapons that gleamed with unnatural light.
The entire council, I whispered, the scope of the betrayal finally hitting me. You all agreed to this.
Not all, Kieran said grimly.
But enough.
The altar pulsed against my back one more time, and in that pulse, I felt something I hadn't expected.
Anger.
Not the wild, chaotic rage I'd known all my life, but something older, cleaner, the righteous fury of every dragon who had died protecting a world that feared them. The wrath of guardians betrayed by those they'd sworn to serve.
You want to know what I choose? I asked, straightening despite my injuries. Fire began dancing around my hands again, but this time it felt different. Controlled, purposeful. The golden veins in the altar blazed so bright they turned the night into day. I chose to stop hiding. What erupted from me then wasn't the desperate, defensive flames of a frightened girl. It was dragon fire in its purest form, not just heat and light, but life itself. The shadow creatures shrieked and dissolved like mist, Before dawn, the frost covering the sacred symbols melted instantly, and the ancient carvings blazed with renewed power. But most importantly, the rift the counselors had opened to bring their creatures through, that tear in reality itself began to seal under the weight of pure creation pressing against it. Impossible, Thorn breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. You're untrained, you shouldn't be able to. I'm learning, I said quietly, and my voice carried harmonics that made the trees themselves seem to listen. Fast. The battle was far from over, but something fundamental had shifted. The shadow creatures were retreating, and several of the counselors looked uncertain for the first time.
Kieran moved to stand beside me, his partially transformed state making him look like some primal god of war. "Last chance, Thorn," he growled. "Call off your pets and walk away."
The counselor's winter pale eyes narrowed. This isn't over, Wolf. She's too dangerous to be left free. If we can't contain her. She didn't finish the thread, but she didn't need to.
As the council and their remaining creatures melted back into the darkness, I felt the weight of my choice settling around me like armor made of starlight.
I had chosen to stop hiding. But that meant everyone who feared dragons, everyone who preferred the safety of suppression to the risk of freedom would be coming for me.
The war Thorn had warned me about. It was already here.
The battle lines had been drawn, but this was only the first skirmish. Can Ember and Kieran survive what comes next? When the full power of the council turns against them?
Chapter 6.
The silence that followed the council's retreat felt heavier than the battle itself. My legs finally gave out, and I slumped against the altar, the dragonstone still warm against my spine, but my own fire guttering like a candle in the wind. The display of power had taken everything I had, and now I was left shaking with exhaustion and the crushing weight of what had just happened. "They'll be back," I whispered, staring at the scorched earth, where the shadow creatures had dissolved, with more people, more weapons.
Kieran was beside me in an instant, his partial transformation melting away to reveal his human form. Concern darkened his golden eyes as he knelt in front of me, his hands hovering just inches from my face like he wanted to touch but wasn't sure he should. "Not tonight," he said softly. "The council needs time to regroup, to figure out how you sealed their rift so easily. We have hours, maybe until dawn."
"Hours?" I repeated with a bitter laugh. "To do what? Plan our funerals?" Instead of answering, he stood and began gathering fallen branches from around the clearing. Within minutes, he had a small fire crackling a few feet from the altar, normal fire, orange and red and blessedly ordinary. The mundane warmth of it was oddly comforting after the supernatural cold that had invaded our sanctuary. "What you doing?" I asked.
"Taking care of you," he said simply, settling cross-legged beside the fire. "When did you last eat? Sleep?"
"You've been running on adrenaline and magic for hours, but your body is still human, still broken, still needs rest." As if summoned by his words, exhaustion crashed over me like a wave. My broken leg throbbed, my ribs ached with every breath, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a full meal. The diner where I worked only allowed staff one free meal per shift, and most days that was all I could afford.
"I don't have time to rest," I protested. But even as I said it, my eyes were growing heavy. The council
"You can wait," Kieran said firmly. He pulled off his jacket when he found clothes and moved closer, draping it around my shoulders. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." The jacket smelled like forest and rain and something distinctly masculine that made my pulse quicken despite everything. I pulled it tighter around myself and tried not to think about how long it had been since anyone had taken care of me like this. How long since anyone had seen me as something worth protecting instead of something to fear. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. "You said you've been watching me for years, but you never approached me, never tried to help. Why now?"
Kieran was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made me look up from the fire. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "Because I knew that approaching you would mean choosing you over everything I'd ever known. Over my pack, my position, my entire world. and I wasn't ready to make that choice.
The firelight played across his features, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the regret etched into the lines around his eyes. He looked older than I'd first thought, not just physically, but like someone who'd carried the weight of difficult decisions for far too long. "What changed?" I asked. A smile ghosted across his lips, but it was sad rather than happy. "Tonight, when I felt you dying on that road, I realized that losing you without ever trying to save you would be 1,000 times worse than losing everything else for the chance to stand beside you."
My throat tightened. You don't even know me.
"Don't I?" He leaned forward, and his golden eyes seemed to see straight through every wall I'd ever built. "You're someone who burns down buildings to protect yourself, but still sends anonymous tips to make sure the homeless camps are evacuated first. Someone who works the night shift at a dive diner because it means you can slip extra food to the hungry kids who come in after school. Someone who spent your entire life convinced you're a monster, but you've never once used your power for anything but protection."
Pain rose in my cheeks. Not fire, just embarrassment. You really were stalking me.
"Protecting you," he corrected, "and falling in love with your heart long before I ever saw your face." The words hung between us, like a bridge. I was afraid to cross. This beautiful, dangerous man, who could transform into a wolf, who commanded ancient magic and faced down shadow creatures without flinching. He was in love with me, with a waitress who lived in a studio apartment, and jumped at her own shadow. "That's impossible," I whispered. "You can't love someone you've never talked to."
Can't I? He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away. And when I didn't, he gently brushed a strand of rain-dampened hair from my face. I've watched you choose kindness over safety every single day for 3 years. I've seen you cry over news stories about children you'll never meet. I've watched you give your last $20 to a pregnant woman whose car broke down, then walk 5 miles home in the rain because you couldn't afford bus fare. His thumb traced along my cheekbone and I shivered at the contact. I fell in love with your soul, Amber. Everything else is just details.
I stared at him, this impossible man with his impossible words, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not the wildfire I'd known all my life, but something warmer, softer, more dangerous than any flame. "I don't know how to trust people," I admitted, my voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Everyone I've ever cared about has looked at me with fear. Eventually, my parents, my brother, my few friends from college, they all realized what I was and decided I was too dangerous to love."
I'm not them, Tyrion said quietly. How do I know that? The question came out more desperate than I'd intended. How do I know you won't change your mind when you see what I'm really capable of? What I become when I stop holding back? Instead of answering with words, he took my hands in his. His skin was warm, calloused from years of physical labor, and completely unafraid of the sparks that danced between my fingers.
Because, he said, meeting my eyes steadily, I've been waiting my entire life for someone who could match my fire instead of being consumed by it. Before I could ask what he meant, golden light began emanating from his skin. Not the subtle glow I'd noticed before, but something far more intense. Ancient symbols blazed to life across his chest and arms, not scars or tattoos, but marks that seemed burned into his very soul. His eyes became molten gold, and when he opened his mouth to speak, I could see fangs that belonged to no earthly wolf. "I'm not entirely human either," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in my bones. "I'm the last alpha of the Shadow Moon Pack. My bloodline traces back to the first wolves who swore themselves to dragon service 3,000 years ago. These marks," he gestured to the blazing symbols covering his skin, "they're oaths written in fire and starlight, promises my ancestors made to yours." The revelation should have been shocking, but instead it felt like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The way he'd found me, the way his presence calmed my chaotic fire, the way the altar had recognized him almost as readily as it had recognized me. "What kind of promises?" I asked.
His grip on my hands tightened.
To guard, to guide, to stand between the dragons and anyone who would harm them. His voice grew softer, more vulnerable, to love without fear or reservation, if we were blessed enough to find them.
Tears I hadn't realized were falling traced down my cheeks. Kieran,
I see you, he said, echoing words from earlier that now carried so much more meaning. All of you, the fire and the fear, the strength and the vulnerability, the monster you think you are and the hero you actually are, and I'm not going anywhere. The ancient marks on his skin pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I realized what I was seeing. Not just magic, but a bond that had been written into our very DNA. Our ancestors had been partners, protectors of each other, two halves of a whole that was stronger together than either could ever be apart. What if I hurt you? I whispered.
what if you don't? He countered. What if you trust me enough to try?
The fire between us crackled, and in its light, I saw something I'd never thought I'd find. Not just acceptance, but celebration. He wasn't asking me to be less than I was, he was asking me to be more. To be everything I was meant to be.
Okay, I breathed, the word barely audible.
But it was enough. He leaned forward and I met him halfway, and when our lips touched, it was like two stars colliding. Fire erupted around us, not destructive, but creative. The kind of flame that forged new worlds instead of burning down old ones. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the clearing around us had transformed. Flowers bloomed where moments before there had been scorched earth. The ancient trees swayed gently in a wind that carried the scent of new growth and infinite possibility. I trust you, I whispered against his lips. And for the first time in my life, I meant it completely.
But trust is a fragile thing, and their enemies are watching. How long can this perfect moment last before the world comes crashing down around them?
Chapter 7.
Dawn came too soon, bleeding through the canopy in shades of gold and amber that should have been beautiful. Instead, the light felt ominous, like the last moments before an execution. I'd managed maybe an hour of sleep curled against Kieran's chest, lulled by the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the warmth of his arms around me.
But even in sleep, I'd felt them coming. They're here, I whispered, not needing to open my eyes to know. The forest itself was holding its breath. The usual morning chorus of birds conspicuously absent. Even the insects had gone silent.
Kieran's arms tightened around me. I know, I can smell them, at least 24 surrounding the grove. I sat up slowly, wincing as my injuries made themselves known. My leg was still broken, my ribs still cracked, but somehow the pain felt distant now. Secondary to the cold dread settling in my stomach like a stone. It's not just the council this time, I said, reading the tension in the air around us. There are others, wolves.
Kieran went very still. My pack.
The words carried a weight of betrayal that made my heart clench. His pack, the people he'd led, protected, called family for who knew how long, and they were here to drag him away from me. Or worse.
Kieran Blackthorn, the voice that cut through the morning air, was deep, authoritative, and achingly familiar to the man beside me.
I felt him flinch like he'd been slapped. Step away from the dragon spawn and we can discuss this like civilized beings. Marcus, Kieran breathed, and the pain in that single word told me everything I needed to know about their relationship. This wasn't just his pack, this was family. A man emerged from the train line, tall, broad-shouldered, with Kieran's dark hair but eyes like winter steel. He moved with the same predatory grace, but where Kieran's presence felt protective, this man radiated barely controlled violence.
Behind him came others, at least 15 wolves in human form, all watching me with expressions that ranged from wariness to outright hostility. And with them, more council members than I'd seen the night before. Thorn was there, of course, her silver hair gleaming like a blade in the morning light.
Brother, the man Marcus continued, and my heart sank. You've forgotten yourself, forgotten your duties, your oaths.
Kieran rose to his feet with fluid grace, placing himself between me and the assembled forces like a living shield. I've forgotten nothing, Marcus, including my oath to protect those who cannot protect themselves.
Protect Mark? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Look around you, brother. Look at what her presence has already brought to our sacred spaces. I followed his gesture and felt my blood turn to ice. The beautiful transformation from last night, the blooming flowers, the renewed growth, was gone. In its place, the clearing showed signs of corruption. Black veins spread through the grass like an infection, and the ancient trees at the grove's edge were beginning to wither. "That's not from me," I protested, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. What if it was? What if my fire, no matter how pure it felt, was actually poisoning everything around me?
Isn't it? Counselor Thorne stepped forward, her pale eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. Tell me, child, in all your years of running, how many places have you left corrupted in your wake? How many cities have reported unexplained blights after you passed through?
The words hit like physical blows. Chicago, where I'd lived for 6 months before the nightmare started driving me away. Detroit, where I'd lasted almost a year before the plants in my apartment building began dying for no reason anyone could explain. Seattle, Portland, Denver, a trail of withered gardens and unexplained phenomena stretching back through my entire adult life. You didn't know, did you? Thorne continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You thought you were hiding, staying under our radar. But you were leaving a trail of ecological disaster wherever you went. We've been following that trail for years. She's lying, Kieran said firmly, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. The dragon fire purifies. It creates, it doesn't destroy. Ancient dragon fire, perhaps? Another council member spoke up, the younger man with cruel eyes from the night before. But she's not an ancient dragon, is she? She's a half-breed abomination whose power is corrupted by human weakness and fear. The altar behind me pulsed weakly, its golden light flickering like a dying bowl. Where last night it had blazed with welcoming warmth, now it felt diminished, tainted. The evidence speaks for itself, Marcus said, gesturing to the spreading blight around us, one night in her presence, and look what's happened to the most sacred site in our territory. How long before this corruption spreads to our packlands, to our children? Several of the wolves behind him shifted uncomfortably, and I saw fear in their eyes, and not just of me, but for their families. Their home. Kieran, one of them spoke up, a woman with graying hair and kind eyes that now held only sorrow. You know, we love you. We followed you through wars, through the long years when the old magic was dying. But this, she gestured helplessly at the withering grove. We can't let this poison spread to our territory.
Elena, Kieran said quietly, and I heard his heart breaking in her name. You raised me. You know me. Have I ever led you astray?
No, she admitted, but you've never been compromised by a mate bond before. Never had your judgment clouded by... Her eyes flicked to me with something that might have been pity. By whatever she's done to you.
She hasn't done anything to me, Kieran growled, his partial transformation beginning to show. The bond is natural, sacred, our ancestors.
Our ancestors, Marcus interrupted coldly, made their oaths to dragons. Not to this thing that wears their face, while poisoning everything she touches. The words cut deeper than any physical wound ever could, because looking around at the spreading corruption, at the fear in the wolf's eyes, at the way even the altar seemed to be rejecting my presence now,
Maybe they were right.
maybe I was exactly the monster everyone had always said I was. She comes with us, Thorne announced, producing what looked like silver shackles that hummed with suppressive magic. Quietly, and we'll make this quick. Her power will be bound, her memories of this life erased, and she'll be relocated somewhere she can't hurt anyone else. And if she doesn't come quietly? Kieran asked, his voice deadly soft.
Thorne's smile was sharp as a blade. Then we'll have to consider more permanent solutions. The threat hung in the air between us, and I felt something inside my chest begin to fracture. Not my power, that was still burning steady, but something more fundamental, my hope. My faith that maybe, just maybe, I could be something other than what I'd always believed I was. No, I said, quietly rising to my feet despite my injuries. I'll go with you. Ember, Kieran started, but I cut him off. Look around, I whispered, gesturing at the corruption spreading through what had been sacred ground. Look at what I've done to this place, to your pack's holy site.
That's not. Yes, it is, I said firmly, and felt tears burning behind my eyes. It always is. Everywhere I go, everything I touch, I poison it. I destroy it. I looked at him, memorizing his face one last time. I'm destroying you too.
The shackles in Thorn's hands grew brighter, their magic reaching out toward me like hungry fingers. But before they could make contact, Kieran moved.
Not away from me, between me and them.
No.
He said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha. She stays with me.
Marcus snarled, his own transformation beginning. Then you've chosen exile. You're no longer welcome in Packlands, brother. No longer family.
Then so be it, Kieran replied without hesitation.
And that's when I realized the most devastating truth of all.
He would give up everything for me. His pack, his family, his entire world. He would lose it all to stand beside me.
Just like the prophecy had always demanded.
Just like every dragon guardian before him. The corruption spread faster now, feeding on my despair, and I understood with crystal clarity what I had to do.
I won't let you destroy yourself for me, I whispered, stepping back from his protective stance. I won't be the reason you lose everything that matters.
Ember, no. But I was already moving. Calling fire not to defend myself, but to create a barrier between us. Golden flames erupted in a wall of light and heat separating me from Kieran, from his pack, from everyone.
I'm sorry I called out over the roar of my own power. For all of it, for the corruption, for the danger, for making you choose.
The last thing I saw before I turned and ran was Kieran launching himself at the wall of flame, willing to burn himself to reach me.
The last thing I heard was him screaming my name. And in that sound, I heard the death of everything beautiful we might have been. The heart-shattering betrayal is complete, but who is the real enemy here? Has Ember made the biggest mistake of her life by running from the one person who truly sees her? I see you there, heart-shattered, right along with Ember's. You felt every word of that betrayal like a knife to your own chest, didn't you? That's because the story isn't just entertainment, it's medicine for souls who've been told they're too much, too dangerous, too different. Your heart is shattered right along with Ember's, I know, because this story is medicine for souls who've been called too much. But thousands of people who need this healing will never find it if you keep scrolling without subscribing. Don't let others suffer alone when one click could guide them home. Subscribe now. Chapter 8. I ran through the forest like a woman possessed, branches tearing at my clothes and my broken legs screaming with every step. But physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in my chest, the feeling of my heart being carved out with a rusty blade while I was still breathing. Behind me, I could hear chaos erupting in the grove. Kieran's roar of rage, the sound of battle, angry voices shouting orders. I'd left him to fight alone. Abandoned him to face his own family's rejection because I was too much of a coward to stand and fight beside him.
Just like I've been running my whole life.
I stumbled into a clearing and collapsed beside a stream, my reflection wavering in the dark water. The face looking back at me was a stranger's wild hair, golden eyes blazing with unshed tears, skin that seemed to glow with inner fire. This was what I truly was. That mousy waitress who kept her head down and her power locked away. A monster. A destroyer. A walking catastrophe who poisoned everything she touched.
Is that really what you think?
The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating not in my ears but in my bones. Ancient, feminine, tinged with an authority that made the very air around me bow in reverence.
I spun around, but the clearing was empty. You cannot see me because you refuse to see yourself. The voice continued, and now I realized it was coming from within me, from the fire that had lived in my chest all these years, the flame I'd spent my life trying to smother. Child of my line, daughter of dragons, you have believed their lies for too long.
What lies? I whispered, my voice cracking. I saw the corruption. I saw the fear in their eyes. Everything I touched turns to poison. Laughter, like silver bells, rang through my mind. You saw what they wanted you to see? Fear made manifest, doubt given form. The corruption was not yours, little flame. It was theirs. The water in the stream began to glow with soft golden light, and suddenly I wasn't looking at my reflection anymore. I was seeing visions, truth carved from light and memory. The grove as it truly was after a kiss. Not corrupted, but more alive than it had been in centuries. Flowers blooming in possible colors, ancient trees standing straighter, the very stones of the altar singing with renewed power. Then came the council, arriving before dawn with artifacts that pulsed with sickly light. Weapons designed not to kill but to corrupt, to twist perception, to make beauty appear as blight, to turn healing into poison. I have grown skilled at this deception over the centuries, the voice continued. I'm making dragons believe they are monsters so they will accept chains willingly.
My hands clenched into fists, sparks dancing between my fingers. You mean, you have never corrupted anything in your life, daughter? Every withered garden, every inexplicable blight, all of it was their work. They followed you, waited for you to settle somewhere, then poisoned the land around you to make you believe you were the cause. The rage that erupted in my chest wasn't the wild, desperate fury I'd always known. It was clean fire, righteous anger, the wrath of every dragon who had died believing they were evil when they had only ever tried to protect and serve.
That made me believe I was poison. I breathed.
Yes,
Just as they convinced your wolf that his pack would reject him, when in truth they were manipulated by council agents to speak words not their own.
The water showed me more. Counselor Thorne standing behind Marcus in the pre-dawn darkness, her hands glowing with compulsion magic. Elena and the other pack members moving like sleepwalkers, their eyes glazed with artificial fear and revulsion.
Even now, the ancient voice continued, your wolf fights not just for his life, but for theirs. The compulsion magic grows stronger, the longer it holds, and soon they will be lost entirely, hollowed out shells filled only with hatred for dragonkind.
I was on my feet before I consciously decided to move. My broken leg suddenly whole, my cracked ribs no longer singing with pain. The fire in my chest wasn't healing me. It was revealing that I had never truly been broken at all.
I have to go back, I said. Yes, but not as the frightened child who ran. Return as what you were always meant to be.
The clearing around me began to shimmer, reality bending like heat waves rising from summer pavement. And in that shimmer, I saw her, the first dragon, the one whose voice had been speaking to me. She stood at the edge of the stream, tall and regal, with golden skin and eyes like molten starlight.
I am Pyrrha, she said, her form becoming more solid with each word. First of our kind, guardian of the sacred flames, and you, daughter of my distant line, are the last hope for both our peoples.
She stepped forward and where her feet touched the ground, golden flowers bloomed in her footprints.
For too long, dragons have been made to believe they were destroyers when they were born to be creators, healers, guardians of the balance between light and shadow. Her eyes blazed with ancient fury. The council's corruption has spread far beyond simple deception. They have opened permanent rifts to the shadow realm, thinking to use its creatures as weapons. But shadow cannot be controlled, only released.
My blood went cold. What do you mean?
The Battle of the Grove was never about capturing you, child. It was about driving you away from the one place your power could seal the rifts permanently. She gestured, and the air around us cracked like glass, revealing glimpses of a world drowning in nightmare. As we speak, shadow creatures pour through dozens of tears. In reality, cities fall to darkness. Innocent people die screaming.
The visions were too terrible to process. New York's skyline wreathed in unnatural night, London's Thames running black with shadow stuff, children fleeing from creatures that existed only to devour light itself.
Why are you showing me this? I gasped. Because you are the only one who can stop it. Tira's form began to fade, but her voice grew stronger. Return to the grove. Save your wolf and his pack from the council's corruption. And then, daughter of dragons, burn away the shadows with fire so pure it will remake the very foundations of the world. I don't know how. Either.
She was barely visible now, just a shimmer of gold and starlight. You have always known. You need only stop being afraid of what you are. The clearing dissolved around me, and suddenly I was back in the forest, but everything was different. I could see the threads of corruption woven through the trees, feel the artificial blight seeping into the earth, and underneath it all, I could sense the real growth. Beautiful, sacred, calling out for healing. In the distance, the sounds of battle had grown desperate. Kieran's roar of pain echoed through the trees, and I knew with crystal clarity that I was almost too late. But not quite.
I began to run again, but this time I wasn't fleeing. This time I was coming home.
Fire erupted around me as I moved, not the defensive flames of a frightened girl, but dragon fire in its purest form. It burned away the council's deceptions like morning mist, revealing the forest as it truly was. Ancient, powerful, alive.
And ahead of me the grove blazed like a beacon calling its guardian home.
I am not your victim, I said, my voice carrying across impossible distances to reach every shadow creature, every council member, every corrupted heart. I am not your monster.
The trees themselves seemed to bend aside as I passed, creating a path straight to my destiny. I am Amber, daughter of dragons, keeper of the sacred flame.
Golden light exploded from my skin, turning night into blazing day, and I am done hiding. The forest itself held its breath as I stepped into the grove, where Kieran knelt bleeding in a circle of his mind-controlled pack, where Councillor Thorn raised weapons that could unmake reality itself.
Where everything I had ever been and everything I was meant to become would be decided in the next few heartbeats.
The Emberborn had finally come home.
The true power awakens, but can even Dragonfire overcome centuries of deception and corruption? The final battle for the fate of both worlds is about to begin.
Chapter 9.
I stepped into the grove like a goddess of war wrapped in starlight and flame. The scene before me was worse than I'd imagined. Kieran knelt in the center of the clearing, his body a map of silver wounds that steamed in the morning air. The pack surrounded him in a perfect circle, their eyes still glazed with Thorn's compulsion magic, silver chains binding their natural forms as they prepared for an execution that would destroy them almost as much as it would him. Because somewhere beneath that artificial hatred, they still loved him. Stop, I said, my voice carrying harmonics that made the very stones of the altar sing in response. Every head turned toward me, and I watched their expressions shift through confusion, fear, and finally, in Thorn's case, vindictive satisfaction. The prodigal dragon returns, she sneered, raising a staff that pulsed with shadow-touched crystal. How wonderfully convenient. Now we can end both threats at once.
The only threat here? I said calmly, walking deeper into the clearing as golden flames danced around my feet. Is you.
The fire I carried now wasn't wild or desperate. It moved with purpose, reaching out to touch the artificial corruption that coated everything like oil, burning it away to reveal the truth underneath. Where my flames passed, the withered grass bloomed green again. The dying trees straightened, their leaves rustling with renewed life.
Marcus snarled, his human form wavering as he fought against the compulsion magic. She's doing it again. Poisoning our sacred ground.
But Elena, sweet Elena, who had raised Kieran like her own son, took a step back, her glazed eyes clearing just slightly as she saw the life returning to their holy site. That's not poison, she whispered, her voice full of wonder.
No, I agreed, letting my power wash over her more gently, burning away Thorn's influence like morning sun dissolving frost. It never was. One by one, the pack members began to shake off the compulsion as my fire revealed the truth of what they were seeing. The clearing wasn't dying, it was more alive than it had been in centuries. The altar blazed with joy at my presence, its golden veins singing an ancient welcome song. Impossible, Thorn hissed, raising her staff higher. The corruption is real. We've tracked it across continents, documented every blight, every lie you've told. I turned to face her fully, and in my eyes she saw not the frightened girl who had fled hours ago, but something far older and infinitely more dangerous. Every deception you've crafted, every innocent life you've destroyed to maintain your stranglehold on power. The truth of it blazed between us like a challenge, and I could see understanding dawn in the eyes of every person present. The council hadn't been protecting humanity from dangerous dragons. They'd been protecting their own authority from beings who could expose their corruption. You want to know what I really am? I asked, raising my hands as golden fire began to pour from my skin like liquid sunlight. I'm everything you've spent centuries trying to destroy. I'm the balance you've worked so hard to break. I'm the light that reveals shadows for what they truly are. The flames erupted skyward in a column of pure creation that could be seen for miles, and in that light, every deception crumbled. The shadow creatures lurking at the edge of the grove dissolved like mist. The artificial blight coating the sacred spaces burned away completely, and the rifts, those tears in reality that the council had opened to fuel their war, began to seal themselves as pure dragon fire poured into the wounds they'd carved in the world. Kieran's silver chains melted away like they were made of ice, instead of blessed metal. He rose to his feet with liquid grace, his wounds closing as my fire washed over him. And when he looked at me, I saw everything I'd ever dreamed of seeing in someone's eyes. Love without fear, acceptance without reservation, pride without surprise. Hello, little dragon, he said softly, and his voice carried all the warmth of a hearth fire on the coldest night. Hello, my wolf, I replied, and felt my heart piece itself back together. But Thorn wasn't finished. With a scream of rage that belonged more to a banshee than a human woman, she raised her staff and called upon power that reeked of the shadow realm, dark magic that should have been impossible for any living being to channel. If I can't bind you, she shrieked, then I'll destroy everything you care about.
Darkness erupted from her crystal, but not the creeping, insidious shadow I'd expected. This was something far worse. Entropy itself. The force that unraveled creation at its most fundamental level, where it touched, reality simply ceased.
The grass didn't wither. It stopped existing. Trees didn't die. They were retroactively never born. And it was spreading toward Kieran, toward his pack, toward everyone I just fought so hard to save. Time seemed to slow as I made a choice that felt inevitable as gravity. I stepped between them and oblivion, spreading my arms wide, letting my fire pour out in every direction as I became not just a guardian, but a living shield against the end of all things. The entropy struck my flames and stopped, not defeated, not deflected, but held, balanced. Because that's what dragons had always been, the force that stood between creation and destruction, holding the line so that life could flourish. But holding back entropy required everything I had, everything I ever could be. Ember! Kieran's voice seemed to come from very far away, though I knew he was only steps behind me. It's okay, I called back, my voice growing fainter as more of myself went into maintaining the barrier. This is what I was made for. This is why the bloodline survived. To stand between light and shadow. To burn bright enough that others could live. Don't you dare, he snarled, and I could feel him fighting to reach me, held back only by the knowledge that touching me now might disrupt the balance and doom us all. Don't you dare sacrifice yourself after everything we've been through. I smiled, even though I wasn't sure he could see it anymore. I'm not sacrificing myself, my love.
I'm becoming what I was always meant to be.
The golden flames around me grew brighter, more intense, and I felt myself begin to transcend the limitations of flesh and bone. This was what Para had meant. This was what the prophecy had always foretold.
Not destruction, but transformation. Not an ending, but a beginning. Besides, I said, my voice now carried on currents of fire that would reach him no matter what happened to my physical form. Someone has to guard the door. Someone has to make sure the shadows never find their way back. The entropy pushed harder against my flames, and I pushed back with interest, feeling my power expand beyond anything I'd ever imagined possible.
Will you remember me?
I asked. The question directed not just to Kieran but to everyone present, to his pack, to the council members who were staring in horror at what Thorn had unleashed, to the world itself. Will you remember that once there was a girl who learned to stop being afraid of her own fire? Forever, Kieran whispered, and in that word I heard a promise that transcended lifetimes.
The barrier held. The shadows retreated. And somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, I felt myself become something larger than I'd ever dreamed possible.
The last thing I saw was Kieran's face, etched with the determination that told me this wasn't goodbye.
It was just the end of the beginning.
Would you have chosen her path? Would you have been brave enough to stand between light and shadow, knowing the cost?
This is what it means to love, without limits, to protect without conditions, to burn so bright that others can see their way home.
If this story has lit something inside you, if Ember's courage has awakened the dragon in your own heart, then hit that subscribe button. Because here in this space we've carved out together, we tell the tales that matter, the ones that remind us what we're capable of when we stop being afraid of our own power.
Hit the notification bell, because Ember's story isn't over. Not by a long shot. And drop a comment below in your own life. What fire have you been afraid to let burn? What power have you been told to hide?
Because sometimes the thing the world calls dangerous is actually the thing the world needs most.
Welcome to the flame, beautiful souls. Welcome to the place where dragons dare to rise.
Next time on our channel, the aftermath of sacrifice, the price of transcendence, and the question that will haunt Kieran until the very end.
Can love truly conquer death? Or is some magic too powerful for even dragon fire to contain? Stay with us.
The fire's just getting started.
Chapter 10. 3 days passed in the grove before anyone dared to speak above a whisper. The barrier of golden fire still blazed where Ember had made her stand, a column of light that reached from earth to sky and pulsed with the rhythm of a living heart. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely impenetrable. Not even Kieran could get close without feeling his skin begin to char from the sheer intensity of her power. She was in there, somewhere. He could sense her presence like a song just beyond the range of hearing, like warmth felt through winter glass, but she wasn't accessible. Not in any way that mattered to those who loved her. Kieran hadn't left the grove's edge since the transformation, hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, had barely spoken, except to growl warnings at anyone who suggested he might need rest. The pack had set up a careful camp at a respectful distance, their earlier hostility replaced by something closer to religious awe. Because they could all feel it, the way the very fabric of reality had grown stronger since Ember's sacrifice. The way shadows seemed less dense, colors more vivid, the air itself more alive. She hadn't just stopped Thorn's entropy wave, she'd begun healing wounds in the world that most people didn't even know existed. She's not dead, Elena said quietly, settling beside Kieran with the careful movements of someone approaching a wounded predator. Whatever she's become, death isn't part of it. Kieran's golden eyes never left the blazing column. I know. Then why do you look like you're grieving? A bitter laugh escaped his throat. Because knowing she's not dead and being able to hold her are very different things. He finally turned to meet Elena's gaze, and she was startled by the raw pain she saw there. She's become something beyond my reach. Beyond anyone's reach. Alina was quiet for a long moment, studying the play of light across Kieran's haggard features. The old stories, she said finally, speak of dragon guardians who could call their mates back from the very edge of transcendence. Love strong enough to anchor even the most powerful magic to the mortal world.
The old stories are myths, Kirin replied flatly. So were dragons. Until 3 days ago. Before Kirin could respond, Marcus approached with the careful deference of someone who knew he was on thin ice. The compulsion magic had broken completely, leaving him with the full memory of what he'd said and done under Thorn's influence. The guilt was eating him alive. "Brother," he said quietly, "there's something you need to see." Kirin's jaw tightened. If this is another attempt to get me to leave,
It's not. Marcus gestured toward the far edge of the grove, where several pack members stood watching something in the distance. "We have visitors." Following Marcus's gaze, Kirin saw figures emerging from the forest. Not council members this time. These newcomers moved with a fluid grace that spoke of supernatural heritage, but their scents carried no taint of corruption or shadow magic. There were perhaps a dozen of them, led by a woman whose silver hair caught the morning light like spun moonbeams. She was tall, regal, with eyes that held the weight of centuries and skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light. "Greetings, Wolf Guardian," she called out as her group drew closer. "I am Laverley of the Northern Courts." We felt the awakening from across the continental divide. Kirin rose slowly, his predatory instincts on high alert despite her peaceful approach. "What courts? What awakening?"
Laverley's smile was enigmatic. The fake courts, young wolf, and the awakening of the last dragon bloodline. Her gaze drifted to the column of fire where Ember maintained her vigil, though I see she has already begun her true transformation.
"You know what's happening to her?" Hope and desperation roared in Kirin's voice. "I know what should be happening," Laverley corrected gently. "Whether it actually will depends on factors we cannot control." She approached the edge of the grove with the confidence of someone accustomed to ancient magics. "May I?" Kirin nodded tersely and Laverley stepped into the sacred space. The moment her feet touched the consecrated ground, the very air began to shimmer with otherworldly energy. Flowers bloomed in her footsteps, not the golden dragon flowers that had sprung up around Ember, but silver blossoms that chimed like distant bells when the wind touched them. "Fascinating," she murmured, circling the barrier of fire with professional interest. "She's not just holding back entropy, she's actively reweaving the damaged sections of reality, creating new patterns where the old ones were torn beyond repair." "Can you help her?" Kirin demanded. Laverley paused in her examination, her ancient eyes meeting his desperate ones. "Help her, young guardian. She doesn't need help. She needs anchor." "I don't understand."
The dragon bloodline was always meant to work in partnership. Laverley explained patiently. Fire and earth, creation and stability, transcendence and mortality. She's become pure creative force. But without something to ground her, she gestured at the blazing column. She'll burn herself out completely. Become nothing but light and memory.
Kirin's heart clenched. How long?
Days. Perhaps hours. Laverley's expression grew grave. The barrier she's maintaining requires constant power. She's burning her own essence as fuel, and even dragon fire has limits. "Then tell me what to do," Kirin said fiercely. "Tell me how to anchor her." Lee was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between the barrier and the desperate wolf guardian. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of prophecy. The old magic speaks of 3 trials for those who would call a transcended dragon back to mortal form: fire, shadow, and truth, each more dangerous than the last. "I'll face them." "You don't understand the cost." "I don't care about the cost," Kirin interrupted, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Name your trials." Laverley studied him for a heartbeat longer, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but know this, Wolf Guardian. These trials will strip away everything you think you are. They will show you truths about yourself, about her, about the nature of love itself that may destroy you, even if you succeed.
And if I fail?
If you fail, Lorelei said quietly, she burns forever, trapped between mortality and godhood, slowly losing pieces of herself until nothing remains but raw power and the echo of what she once was.
Kieran looked at the barrier one more time, memorizing the way the golden flames danced, carrying with them the essence of the woman he loved.
When he turned back to Lorelei, his golden eyes burned with determination that matched any dragon fire.
When do we start?
Lorelei's smile was sharp and sad and proud all at once. We don't, Guardian. You do. And you start now.
She raised her hand, and the air around them began to shimmer with portal magic. Not the harsh tear of shadow magic, but something older and far more dangerous. The first trial awaits in the realm of living fire, she said as reality began to bend around them, where you will face not just her power, but the deepest truth about your own nature. As the portal opened, swirling with colors that had no names, Kieran heard something that made his heart leap and break at the same time. Ember's voice carried on currents of flame and starlight, barely recognizable but unmistakably hers.
Kieran, are you still there?
He stepped toward the portal without hesitation. Always, little dragon, I'm coming for you. The last thing anyone saw before the portal closed was Kieran disappearing into light itself, leaving behind only his promise echoing in the morning air. But in the shadows at the edge of the grove, something else stirred. Something that had been waiting, watching, learning from the display of power it had witnessed.
Counselor Thorne's body was gone, consumed by her own entropy magic. But her voice lingered, carried on whispers of shadow that the golden barrier couldn't quite purify.
The trials will break him. And when they do, when she burns herself to nothing trying to save what cannot be saved, then the real hunger will be free to feed.
Deep in the earth beneath the grove, something ancient and patient began to move. Something that had been sleeping since the last dragon died, waiting for enough power to wake up. The Emberborn's fire blazed brighter in response to the stirring darkness, but even dragon flames cast shadows. And in those shadows, older hungers were finally stirring to life.
The war for the fate of both worlds had only just begun.
The trials of love and fire await. But some hungers are older than dragons, and some shadows are too deep for any light to penetrate.
This is far from over.
In fact, it's barely even started.
End of part 1.
Will Kieran survive the 3 trials to bring his dragon home? What ancient evil has been awakened by Ember's transformation? And what price will they both pay for a love that burns brighter than the stars themselves? Find out in part 2, The Trials of Fire and Shadow, coming soon to this channel. Until then, keep that flame burning, beautiful souls. The darkness hasn't won yet.